So we've received a lot of questions regarding a clip by Dr. Umar, and I wanted you to listen to it and give us your feedback.
When I was raised in one of those mosques, you understand? But I had to walk away because I saw how we completely ignored black people's problems. We completely ignored black culture. We completely ignored the black reality. It was all Islam. Learn your Arabic. And I'm like, I'm a practicing Arab. I'm not practicing Islam. I'm practicing Arabism. Why do I got to learn Arab language to worship God? Why do I got to eat like the Arab to worship God? Why do I got to dress like the Arab to worship God? This is not the worship of God. This is the deification of Arabic culture. And that's why I walked away from it. And now African spirituality is my foundation.
He's a little bit, he gets hyper when he talks. I've heard this clip, and I know people asked us about it. And I've seen that Muslims responded. I didn't get all of their responses. I didn't hear everything. But, he just said African spirituality is his way now. But he's speaking pure English right now. Every time I heard him, I don't hear him speaking the languages of Africa. In other words, I'm going to that clip that part of the clip where he said, "Well, I got to talk Arab or Arabic." But anyway, I think that when I'm hearing him, he's brought this up before. He's brought this up before, at least 2 or 3 times that I remember, and I've mentioned before his name. When I first got wind of him as a person, he was Umar Abdullah Johnson. And then he just shortened it to Umar Johnson or Dr. Umar. So in those other clips, he made clear he was born in a Muslim family. I think that his critique, as I have heard it, and like on this one, I think that we as African American Muslims, we love our religion. And we know the value of our religion. But I think one of the things that our religion impresses upon us to be is objective and sensitive, and to really hear with our head and heart. Listen with our head and heart. And I think if we do that, I think he has a point, though he's not 100% correct. He's wrong too. He's wrong in the sense that Islam is not an Arab religion. All Muslims know this. Islam is not an Arab religion. And as a matter of fact, the continent of Africa played a very important role in the history of Islam since the beginning, since the inception of Islam. For example, before the Muslims made hijrah to Medina, which was known as Yathrib at that time, the first hijrah was to Abyssinia, Ethiopia today. And they were under the protection of the Christian king, who was an African man. So Islam was in Africa before it even went to other parts of Arabia. The history of Islam in West Africa is well known. We know, according to documented history, that 20 to 40%, as a low estimate, of the Muslims brought to the Americas were Muslim. So he, being a scholar, he's a psychologist by training, but he's a scholar in general of the African diaspora. He speaks on that. I'm sure he knows these things. I'm sure he knows it. So Africa and Arabia, even culturally, again, there has been among scholars, anthropologists, and historians too, they have taken notice of the fact that certain parts or groups among the Arabs and in certain regions like in southern Arabia, the language, the music styles, even the dress mirrors what's in East Africa. Like, for example, the Arabic language is a sister language of what they call the Ethiopic Semitic, I think is the expression, which is spoken in East Africa. They have the same patterns, the root systems, etc. So there's some clear overlap there. So that's from the perspective of black or African scholarship. I would offer those arguments, and we have had dynamic authors who've written in this regard. I think as it pertains to the religion in and of itself, as a set of beliefs and practices, etc., Islam is a universal religion, and everybody knows that. We are taught in the Quran and in the prophetic tradition that our superiority, our value is based upon our taqwa. It is not rooted in our ethnicity or our race or things like that. And even the Arabic that we learn from the Quran is what we call Quranic Arabic. The way that the Quran was, the way of the Quran, the structure of the Quran, the patterns and the meanings were not known to the Arabs like the Arabs on the street. That's why the Prophet was called a soothsayer. He was called a magician. He was mocked. He was said that someone with a foreign tongue or a foreigner teaches you, because though the Arabs of his time could understand him, he was expressing the language in the Quran in such a way that they weren't used to. So all of the scholars of the Quran in the Arabic language, they know that the Quranic Arabic is unique. It's its own system in and of itself. And because of that, it has a universality to it. So the history says that even some of the majority, if I'm not mistaken, the most notable scholars of the Arabic language, those who systematize Arabic grammar and the lexicons and really established the system of knowledge for Arabic study, they were not even Arabs. They were Persians. They were other groups. And there have been notable scholars in that field of work practically everywhere, in Turkey, in Africa, etc. So that's that. And then after the Quran comes what's called Fusha Arabic. But again, this is technical Arabic. This is not street Arabic. This is a language, and these are systems of language, like in Islamic law or in theology. These are terms that the Arabs never had before. You know, they didn't have terms for existence and essences and accidents, etc., to subsist in an essence, all of that. These things don't exist before. They come after the Quran, and then after the Muslims, upon the inspiration of the Quran, reach out into other civilizations and become an advanced people. The Muslims become an advanced people. So I disagree with him from that angle. There is an angle, though, that I do agree with him on. I'm not hearing what he's saying word for word. I don't want to pick apart his words, though those are his words. What I'm hearing, though, because I've heard him say this and I've heard other African Americans say this, I think what I'm hearing from him is that black Muslims, African American Muslims, too many of them have lost themselves. They have formed themselves in the image of another group of people. And I think that there's some truth to that. Not 100%, obviously. I don't want to be an Arab, and I'm not part of a group of people or persons that want to be Arab. I don't belong to a group like that. However, I can't deny what I've experienced in my own history, where I think and again, you have to get into the mind of the observer. What is he seeing? When you go back to the Nation of Islam days, when Islam first makes itself known, or at least you can say the name Muhammad, the name Allah, Quran, like these things just weren't known. When this first becomes known in Black America, the people who were bringing that language and that message, they were black people. And not were they just African American or black people, they also tended to be the more refined among us. That's the classic stereotype, which was true, that this brother used to get in trouble, or he went to prison, or something happened. He became a Muslim and he got cleaned up. And he changed his name to whatever, Shabazz. So in the history of the black community, the Muslims were known as the people in the forefront of advancing the interest or interests that all African Americans were concerned with. I think after the transition and after the influx of influences outside of Black America from the broader Islamic world, I think we do see a change. We see a change in the dress. I remember, and I've heard it spoken of growing up, you're in the middle of Chicago in the winter and a guy has on sandals and a thobe with an orange beard. And he's saying, I'm dressing like this because this is how the Prophet dressed. And I think in the minds, and you'll hear this criticism like, well, if the Prophet dressed like this, that was in the desert. We're in south side of Chicago in December. So the people observing that in Black America, they're hearing Muslims change their dress, You know, you come over grandma's house, you don't eat with your fork anymore. You eat with your hand. You don't engage with family. They're kafir. There's just a change that does seem to emphasize another culture more than another belief system. Because in a lot of instances, I'm going to say in Black America, we saw these men and women change physically on the outside, but we didn't see an internal reformation. We didn't see them become more refined as thinkers, more elevated in terms of their spirituality, morality, and ethics. They no longer really even stepped into the leadership of our community like Black Muslims were in the days of the Nation of Islam. On the contrary, they separated themselves more so from the community and its needs. So the people, the African Americans looking at us from the outside are saying, you have left your own people. It's much like, Frantz Fanon wrote this book, Black Face, White Mask, or Black Skin, Black Face, White Mask. And he's criticizing the people, the blacks of Martinique who would go off to study in French schools, and they would come back and they would be more French than the Frenchman himself. He was criticizing an identity crisis. In the history of Black America, we know of the phenomena of African Americans or blacks going to get higher education, getting into certain schools, being accepted into certain circles, and now they are no longer able to mix up and and have real connection with their own people. They become another people. I think that has happened. I do think that it hasn't happened everywhere, but I do think in large part that has happened. And even I've heard Dr. Johnson say this, even like Palestine. Palestine is an atrocity. And the general position, I think, of most people is that globally. But at the same time, we hear very little Black Muslims talk about Sudan or Ethiopia. They take up the Palestinian cause. So it's almost like if all things Arab become the standard for what is Islamic in any other issue, though it be amongst the Muslims, is secondary in terms of importance. And I think that that's a problem. And I think that people like Dr. Johnson, he grew up in that. He probably he won't admit he's hurt by that. A lot of times psychologists go into that field. They've actually studied this. They go into psychology because they themselves have something ticking, something going on. He's probably been hurt by that. I think a lot of Black people have experienced that. And I think that the answer to it is that we present the clear and correct message of Islam, the universal message of Islam, and the Quran as a healing for what's in the breast of all people, and Muhammad as the universal model. We should not be communicating to people in Black America or anywhere else culture. We should not be subverting the life of a people for something else. And I do believe that a lot of African American Muslims wrestle with that. So if Du Bois posited a double consciousness, maybe Black Muslims have a triple consciousness, and that's the problem. If you have split personalities or I'm this way here and this way over there, how can you function as a full, complete human being? So that's what I'm hearing there. I have my disagreement, but I have my agreement. And I think that as Muslims too, I'll say this in conclusion, we learn this from the scholars in the history of the religion. You never want to just reject your critics. I don't. When people criticize me, well, maybe they're right. I don't agree all the time. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, they're right. I shouldn't have did it that way. So I think that we have to be slow to just react emotionally and see, even if I don't, it's like when you're married, your wife can be complaining about something, but it's not really that thing she's complaining about. That thing is representative of another bigger, more big issue. So we have to start to listen like that. Listen sensitively to see if these people who are criticizing us are standing on something, and let us question ourselves.